To Wishart Municipal Group webinar number 14. That everybody's well. It's great to see so many people were able to track us and get the right date for the webinar. We're sorry that we got usurped by the Assistant Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs last week. They had a webinar that they said representatives of all 440 municipalities attended, dealing with community betterment charges. So I'm glad that we were able to reschedule so that you could all attend that conference. It was certainly interesting more for the larger municipalities, I think. But Bill 197 is going to figure in large in our lives going forward, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So we have some special guests with us. Well, one special guest, I guess. We have Nicole Grisdale, who is the Provincial Offences Court Liaison Supervisor. And she's going to provide us with an update about the reopening of the Provincial Offences Court, which is certainly something that municipalities are going to be interested in, because that will allow you again to enforce your bylaws using the court process. And for those who don't know, we have Mia Carella on the line. She has done many years of prosecutions for municipalities in the Provincial Offences Court. So if you have any questions arising out of Nicole's presentation, or you would need to talk about enforcement, then Mia is certainly our go-to for that sort of experience. So welcome, Nicole, and we're super glad that you're here. The other person that you may not recognize is the newest member of our team. Jennifer Clay is a lawyer who has joined our office, and she is assisting primarily in the labor and employment field. Jennifer comes to us with a master's in industrial relations, and certainly a lot of the employment law that we do is for municipalities. So if you have any questions about employment law, employment contracts are something that has changed drastically by the court of appeal in the last few weeks, then give us a call, and you may very well be speaking to Jennifer in that regard. I wanted to mention, with respect to our training, that we have many municipalities that have gone through it now. I wanted to remind staff that the design of the program is such that everybody gets a certificate, so that in the event that you ever have to demonstrate either in a court or to the Ministry of Labor that you took steps to train all of your staff, everybody will get a certificate that will show that you have gone through our training, which would help in any sort of a due diligence defense if there were ever charges or litigation brought against the municipality arising from the COVID reopening. So we've put that together to help assist you. So we have a fairly full agenda today. Tim is going to give us a legislative update. Certainly the provincial legislature has been very busy, and you'll hear a little bit about Bill 197 and other things. Then Nicole is going to give us the update from the Provincial Offences Court. I'm going to talk a little bit about electronic meetings, and I'm sure that anybody who's been in my training is going to think that I'm psychic, because what I said was going to happen is. Nuala's going to talk to us about masks. She's also going to talk to us about the consistency, or the need for consistency in your COVID precautions when you're reopening. Jen is going to talk a little bit about employment issues, specifically dealing with workplace harassment and issues that are related to the COVID crisis. And then Mia is going to give us her helpful reminders for your municipality. So I'm going to get started, because I think we have a lot to cover, and I'll ask Tim to take care of the legislative update for the last number of weeks since we were last on the webinar. So over to you, please, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us. we're continue to be excited as we go forward. To stage 3 now. Everybody may or may not know that starting today, stage 3 is upon us. And stage 3 essentially, one of the things to remember is that the staged reopening of the province has been done along the jurisdictional borders of the 34 different health units. So Algoma, of course, where we are, is one of the areas that's able to enter stage 3. Most regions are. The major exceptions, there are a few: Toronto, Peel region, Windsor, Essex, York, I believe Niagara as well. There may be a few others, but the majority of the 34 health units, the majority of municipalities within the boundaries of the 34 health units across the province are able to reopen, or enter stage 3, I should say. Some of the highlights. One of the, before jumping into for everybody, is the declaration of emergency. The provincial declaration of emergency has been extended until July 20th, and the majority of the emergency orders thereunder have been extended until July 29th. One of the interesting things that Bill 197 that Paul mentioned is going to do is it's going to give the provincial government the ability, if it passes, and it's in second reading right now. If it passes, it will give the provincial government the ability to pass emergency orders even in the absence of a declared emergency. And I want to mention as well that even if I'm confident that the declaration of emergency will be extended beyond July 24th, but even if it is not, that doesn't affect the ability of local municipalities to declare a local emergency under Section 4 of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. So you will still be able to do that. And of course, those places entering stage 3, Nuala's going to talk about mandatory masks and things of that nature. But one of the things to remember as well is local health authorities have the ability to make orders. And certainly here in Algoma, we have an order that masks are mandatory in public areas. And Nuala will talk some more about mandatory mask orders, but I just wanted to foreshadow that a little bit for everyone. So one of the big things with stage 3 reopening is that the social gathering limits have increased significantly. So for indoor social gatherings, now it's permitted to have a social gathering up to 50 people. So an individual is only prohibited from attending a social gathering where there are more than 50 people. That's an indoor social gathering. For outdoor social gatherings, the limit has been increased to 100 people. And the province has made clear, though, interestingly, in the order that they passed doing that, they made it clear that you cannot combine an outdoor gathering with an indoor gathering, or outdoor public event with part of it being indoor, so as to essentially increase the limit. So I think some people may have there may have been a concern, let's say, that some organizations might try and hold events partly indoors and partly outdoors to get maybe 150 people permitted. The government has said you cannot do that. The other thing about public gatherings, and this applies to social gatherings, those limits apply to social gatherings as well. They're permitted only so long as individuals are able to maintain the 2-meter distancing, the social distancing requirements. That also applies to social gatherings in private dwellings as well. So social distancing applies even to a gathering of, let's say, get together with friends or something at your own house. It still applies that you have to follow social distancing guidelines. Businesses are able to reopen. Most businesses are able to reopen now in stage. If you're in a stage 3 area, most of your businesses are able to open. Some notable exceptions to that include amusement parks and water parks. buffet style food services. So a restaurant cannot, although a restaurant can open, it can't have buffet service within the restaurant. Dancing at restaurants and bars, other than performers hired by, other than bands and things hired, you're not going to necessarily be able to do that. Overnight stays at camps for children, that still remains closed. Those still remain closed. Although camps can reopen, and there are certain requirements that apply to children's camps. Private karaoke rooms can't reopen. That's a real problem for me. Prolonged and deliberate contact while playing sports. The sports teams can practice in private facilities, and for anybody who watches the NHL or MLB, there are rules that apply to those, because the private sports there can't be contact in private sports unless sports can continue. As long as there's no contact, there's different rules that apply to the NHL and MLB and major sports organizations that permit them to practice under different rules. So they'll be set for next season, hopefully. Saunas, steam rooms, and oxygen bars can't reopen. Casinos can, but no table games. So the table games have to stay closed, but other types of games can. And that's really all I wanted to say about stage three reopening. I know we have a full agenda, and really stage three, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment. Indoor dining, we're getting back into that now, so restaurants can have indoor dining, but subject to some restaurants that are putting up plexiglass. You can either have the tables be spaced 2 meters apart, or there can be plexiglass separating tables. So some restaurants are doing that as well. So it will be interesting to see what happens. Again, even the mask requirement is on as well, and so of course you can take your mask off to eat in a restaurant. And another thing that I just thought I'd mention as well is bars that are located within restaurants. The government's clarified that if there's a bar or a separate food area within a bar that's able to open, those are able to reopen as well. So if there's a restaurant that has a separate bar area, the bar area is able to reopen as well. So that's a bit of the update on stage three. I'm going to turn things back over to Paul, and of course I'm looking at the chat as well. So if any questions come up, we'll try and get to those as well. And thanks again, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. And as I say, I'm excited to see that we're moving forward as a province, and we're seeing fewer numbers of COVID per day. I can't remember the last number, but I think it was maybe 111 new cases on Thursday, and so I believe we're still under 2,000 total. So I'm really happy about that, and happy that we're in a place where we're reopening, where we're able to reopen. So with that, I'll turn things back over to Paul, and thank you once again, everyone.
So Tim, I have a question about what you were just talking about. So it seems to me that the province essentially prohibited municipal council meetings in person when they put the limit of 10 people. Now that they've changed the limit, does that mean we can go back to having council meetings in person?
So what it means, yeah, what it means actually is you can have any organized public event that's indoors that's up to 50 people. So the prohibition, and remember, Paul, well, the prohibition is on individuals attending an event. So it's actually on the individuals themselves, not on the organization. So the prohibition is that no individual shall attend an organized public event that's indoors of more than 50 people. So a municipal council meeting could be held indoors, and it could be as long as the attendees are limited to 50 people. And within that, remember as well that within that 50 person limit, social distancing requirements still have to be met, and so you'd have to have a space big enough to permit, let's say, chairs to be 2 meters apart from people. So it's possible to hold indoor council in-person indoor council meetings, but subject to those restrictions the government's placed.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tim. So I know that Nicole has lots to do, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Nicole. I want everybody to understand that Nicole's going to tell us about the reopening of the Provincial Offences Court and what that's going to look like. So I don't think she can see the chat, but if you have questions, we'll try to pass those on to her. So over to you, Nicole. Thank you so much for coming today.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, good morning to everybody, and thank you so much for the invite today. So I'm just going to give you a brief update on the Provincial Offences Courts. So the information that I'm able to speak about today is limited, obviously, to the POA courts, not all courts in general. It's also applicable as of today, and as we all know, things are changing quickly, and what I say today may be modified tomorrow. So the information being provided is what I'm able to share and not intended anyway for legal advice. So just to give you a quick update of our catchment area in Sault Ste. Marie. So the City of Sault Ste. Marie's catchment area for the Provincial Offences Court is just north of Wawa and east of Thessalon. And in that area, there's up to 19 municipal partners. The Provincial Offences Court, as you well know, has been closed since March 16th. And most recently, I think the last notification was July 3rd, which now includes up to and including September 11th. So this is a target date, September 11th, but it can be extended again, depending on the current situation at the time. And I believe that was the third extension since March 16th. So our approach to reopen the POA courts is it's a phased-in approach, obviously with the health and safety being the #1 priority for staff, judiciary, the public, the Ministry of Attorney General, representatives from the Ontario Court of Justice, and also representatives from the Provincial Offences Court themselves and stakeholders created a subcommittee, like an ad hoc committee, to determine if technology can be used to increase the ability to access services, to plan eventual resumptions. They also created a guidebook that was provided to the municipalities to prepare for the court resumption. The guidebook addresses precautionary measures such as furniture placement, signage, being posted, PPE, plexiglass, cleaning protocols, and also including a screening area. Also, the ad hoc committee is looking into changing legislation to include more remote hearings because the legislation, as you well know, is very limited. So currently, some family and criminal courts have resumed using these guidelines in place. So this will give us, the POA courts, an opportunity for to see the advantages, the disadvantages, and that's very beneficial for us. So they're, I guess, like the guinea pig of what's going to happen for the resumption of courts. The Ministry of Attorney General, the Ontario Court of Justice meet weekly with the POA court managers. We discuss updates, and it keeps the communication open with all 59 municipal courts, including satellite courts, as to the potential reopening. Concerns are expressed with backlog situations and the province, and we'll just provide some updates for us just to keep everybody on the same page, because it's very, very stressful time. So there's many different factors to be considered, such as technology, as I mentioned before, remote hearings, which is a very high priority on the province's list. I think we're very behind in the times, and I think it's a good time to change that and incorporate more technology. The court dockets, or the court master plan, or the schedule, is actually dictated by the province, not the municipalities. So the municipalities, we're just currently waiting for direction from the Regional Senior Justice of the Peace to provide adjournment dates. All the matters from March 16th, inclusive to September 11th, are basically just on hold. So we've been given authority by the province under the POA Act to administratively adjourn all these matters, and they're basically just on hold waiting for dates. And like I had mentioned, we are waiting for dates from the regional senior. So in the meantime, we're preparing the court area, the admin areas, using the guidebook that was provided by the province and to support our recovery of court operations. Implementing measures to mitigate the risk, obviously, of the transmission, but still ensuring access to justice. The ministry provides ongoing updates, obviously, I'm sure you're all aware, on their website of the extension of timelines on a regular basis, ontariocourts.ca. Just to give you a little brief update on the city. So the city of Sault Ste. Marie is now open to the public with limited access to services, confining the public to the main lobby only, restricted access to elsewhere in the building. The POA office is located on level 1, which the access is through the west entrance only. So at this time, the POA office is closed to the public. Although City Hall has limited services, the POA office is not open. However, we have staff working and have been working since March 16th, 8:30 to 4:30, answering phones, taking payments, online, by mail, the Dropbox. Still a lot of ways to make your payments or schedule trial dates. We're also accepting all Part 1 and Part 3 information from all police agencies and any other court paperwork. So we've been working through this whole time. We're hopeful in the near future that the POA will reopen to the public. However, services still continue, as I mentioned above, and there is no expected date at this time. We just want to ensure that all proper measures are taken before we make the decision to reopen. And as I stated earlier, all POA offices are unique. So individual services are available depending on the location and staff. What we're doing at Sault Ste. Marie might not be the same as what the city of Espanola or the town of Espanola or the city of Windsor are doing. So every municipality is unique and different in itself. So I think that is my brief summary of the Provincial Offences Court.
Thanks very much, Nicole. So do you know, is what you're telling us about Sault Ste. Marie generally similar to what we're seeing throughout Northern Ontario and Eastern Ontario Provincial Offences Courts?
Well, the Northeast region, we're all basically currently, as of today, in the same situation. So I believe the town of Corbeil, or the city of Corbeil, is the only POA office open at this time within the Northeast, because that's all I can even speak about with that. Everybody else's offices the POA offices are closed.
Okay, and you mentioned the OntarioCourts.ca website.
Yep.
Will municipalities that are participating in your Provincial Offences Court receive some kind of notice or notification when the court is going to reopen?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But like right now, the province is providing the updates. There's a lot of courts, well, I shouldn't say there's a lot, there's a few courts with early resolution sites that have reopened. Not even all early resolution sites have reopened. And the province ensures that those updates are made on the provincial government website. Because we're not province-wide, so that's the difficulty. Like, for example, the Ontario Court of Justice is province-wide, so everything's similar. But the municipalities, as you're well aware, are not. Each of them are individual, so it's a challenge for sure.
Well, thanks very much. I'm looking for questions. Mia, do you have anything you wanted to mention?
No, I don't think so. I think Nicole did a really good job.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Nicole. We really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. I know that you're on holidays, and good luck and be safe. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me, you guys, and have a wonderful day.
Okay, take care. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is the concept of electronic meetings. Now, if anybody was in council orientation with me in 2019 when the amendments came into Section 238, that's when the province finally gave us the authority to have councillors attend meetings electronically. And that's in Section 238, subsection 3.1. And remember that those restrictions said that councillors attending electronically cannot count for quorum, and that councillors attending electronically cannot participate in closed session. And so I said at the time that that's going to change, but I certainly didn't know it was going to change because of COVID. So then, of course, the provincial orders came out with respect to the emergency, and we got cut down to no more than 10 people in an event, which essentially got rid of our ability to have in-person council meetings, and we all went, almost all of us went electronic. So the legislature, in seeing that problem, passed Bill 187, which was the Municipal Emergency Act, and most of the municipalities online with us today amended their procedural bylaw to allow electronic meetings during the declared emergency. So last week, the province announced Bill 197, and it's not passed yet, but it's being discussed in the legislature. It has passed first reading, so the next steps would be second, third reading, and then finally passing it. And we've certainly seen the legislature working cooperatively and quickly to get legislation passed. Bill 197 amends 12 different pieces of legislation, including the Municipal Act, the Municipal Affairs Act, and on all sorts of municipal related acts. And what that bill looks like it's going to do now is permit us to go ahead with electronic meetings on a go-forward basis. So today, Bill 197 has not passed. And if it does not pass by the time the emergency is over, then we have to go back to the rules under Section 238, subsection 3.1, which means that councillors do not count for quorum and cannot participate in closed sessions. But if 197 does pass, we're going to be able to have electronic meetings even if there is no emergency, just because the municipality wants to. Now, again, there would be a further amendment required to your procedural bylaw to take advantage of that. And we will keep you posted on that. But my prediction is that we're going to see Bill 197 pass before the emergency is over, so that we could continue one form or another of electronic meetings. And certainly one of the things that I'm seeing in the council meetings that I've been attending during the crisis is that a lot more ratepayers are participating in council meetings, watching council meetings electronically. And so I'm seeing that we're getting a fair bit more public engagement than we were in the past. And so I'm going to be, on an ongoing basis, urging municipalities to consider continuing electronic meetings so that they can take advantage of that public engagement as we shift from an emergency to a more normal situation, and we can take advantage of that public engagement. So that's what I wanted to tell you about electronic meetings today. They are probably going to remain in the future, and we'll update you as Bill 197 goes through. Candy has asked a question about masks. And I think that Candy is a little bit psychic because Nuala is now going to talk to us about masks. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Nuala to talk about masks and hopefully answer Candy's question, which in essence is, do you think it's a good idea for council to pass a bylaw requiring the wearing of face masks? So over to you, Nuala.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to see so many participants again this morning. Always gives us sort of a temperature as to everybody being healthy and safe And as always, we really appreciate your time and attention, particularly in these times when your valuable time is just so taxed with all the other things you have going on. We really appreciate that. Out of all the webinars that you could choose, and there are a host of them, we really appreciate particularly the return guests that come on so often to participate. Really delighted that you could be with us. Absolutely our favorite group of clients far and away is the municipal group, and we're delighted to be with you this morning. A couple of things I just want to mention about masks. I spoke a few weeks ago and said I really recommended against councils passing bylaws requiring mask wearing in the municipality. The reason I said that was because although you have the authority under the Municipal Act to pass anything that would be in the best interest of your community, particularly something that is health-based, I think it's absolutely critical that we defer to local health units. They're the experts in this field, and municipal people, politicians, staff, we really are not. One of the things about deferring to local health units, I think just to drive home, you know, we spoke earlier also about compliance fatigue, and I think it's getting to be a little bit like that almost in terms of deference to local health units. So I want to just take a minute actually and drive home the importance of following their recommendations. Well, one of the first sessions we had, I was reading and I shared with you that it's very important. Sure. Tim wants me to change spots with him. I don't know if there's any significance to that.
We're on the phone.
One of the first sessions we had, I shared with you that it's very important to follow the precautions and allow the science to catch up. So what that means is, if our local health units are wrong and masks really didn't do anything, who cares? Follow it right now. It's the best information we have. It's probably correct. And if there is science that's going to say, well, only in this case or this particular type of mask, so be it. But it's very important to follow those local precautions. And I'm not sure how many of you followed, there was a case in Florida, very tragic case about a young girl, 17-year-old girl, whose parents were members of QAnon, which is an ultra right-wing group in the United States, really ascribed very much to Donald Trump's mandates. And this young woman, and often there's a Christian component to it, although it's not particularly a religion unto itself. But in this case, they were a Christian family, and the young teenager attended a church function with a number of other youth, and became sick with COVID-19. And her parents treated her with hydrochloroquine, which Donald Trump in the past has recommended as a cure for COVID. And tragically, that young lady died. So I can't stress how important it is that the experts in public health, in communicable diseases, in infection control are our local health units, the Centers for Disease Control, and the World Health Organization. It's imperative that we follow what they have to say. In terms of our responsibilities as municipal leaders, if you pass a bylaw, we saw this when smoking became such a hot issue in municipalities. There was a brief period, maybe many of you will remember, there was a brief period where the province hadn't caught up with the municipality. So municipalities could, under that same section, pass bylaws prohibiting smoking on patios and so forth. And some municipalities, including Dessous, got into some trouble because you had duplicitous legislation. That is, you had provincial legislation that says this is what no smoking areas look like, and then you had municipal bylaws that said something different. As municipalities, we're the kid brother of the province, so the province needs to set that. Sometimes the best intentions in terms of protecting communities' health run awry because we pass bylaws that actually just muddy the waters. Now you have two pieces of legislation telling people two different things about mask wearing. My recommendation remains consistent that do not pass such a bylaw, but absolutely follow what your local health unit is saying to do. And again, I can't stress enough, I'm really indebted, we're all indebted to particularly the elected officials, because it's such a thankless job. It's almost volunteer work, really, to be on city council. You can lead by example. So make sure that you're not seen in the grocery store or the pharmacy without your mask on. And as we said in the past, make sure you wear it properly. To have it so that you're not covering your nose and mouth, you might as well, not wear it. So you wear it the same way you'd wear, a hard hat or steel-toed boots. There's a way to do it. It's not that complicated, but it's easy to get lazy about it and not follow those recommendations. And that leads me sort of into my next topic about consistency. And we've seen, for example, with the contact tracing in
Look, can I interrupt you before you move on to consistency and talking about masks and bylaws? And one of my thoughts, and I support what you're saying, is with respect to enforcement, because if we leave the order under the Algoma Public Health or any health unit, then the health unit, assisted by the police, is actually the organizations that enforce that legislation, and it's provincial legislation. As Nuala said, we're subordinate to the province. So that legislation actually has more teeth than a municipal bylaw. So the flip side of that is, if a municipality does pass a mask bylaw, then they're taking on, and this is something that council needs to think about, they're taking on the enforcement role. And so you need to have bylaw enforcement officers that are prepared to go out and police the mask issue, which you don't have to do if you leave it to your health unit. So in that respect, I also agree with Nuala's suggestion that leaving the health regulation of masks to the health unit will prevent duplicitous legislation, and it will also prevent you as a municipality from taking on the expense and, frankly, liability. Because if you have a mask bylaw and you don't enforce it and somebody gets sick, I can just about guarantee that the municipality will be a defendant in a lawsuit. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, Nuala, before you moved off of masks.
Yeah, Paul, thank you for interjecting. I think that's really very salient. It's sort of a pet peeve of mine that municipalities, often in response to pressure from the community, pass bylaws to address whatever ill is facing the community at the time. And my advice always to municipalities: don't pass a bylaw if you can't enforce it. If you don't have the resources, the human power to enforce it, then it just becomes a toothless tiger, and it's really kind of laughable. Maybe Mia, when it's her turn to speak, maybe she'll speak about the real trouble that you get into with duplicitous legislation when you're trying to prosecute. And I told you before, Mia has an outstanding conviction record. So this is the kind of stuff where she'd lose in court, not because of the facts are there, the evidence is there, but there's this overriding legal principle about duplicitous legislation. So if your goal is the health of your community, and I know it is, stick with the one piece. Stick with one piece of legislation. You're not exposed to the liability. You're not going to have duplicity in terms of enforcement going forward, and it's just much easier. That was a hard concept to get across with smoking, because people were so adamantly opposed to smoking. Certainly 2 laws must be better than 1. It's not actually. It actually makes things worse. So I'll just continue in terms of consistency. We see it with bars and restaurants. There seems to be an inconsistency in the contact tracing. Perhaps that's going to get tightened up, but I've noticed even locally, some places ask for a first name, a phone number. Some don't ask at all for who's seated. Don't fall into that trap with your municipality. If you're requiring masks in your workplace, be very clear about what you mean by your workplace. What common areas do you have to wear masks? And here, for example, in our law firm, we're all masked today, not in private offices, but in any of the common areas. When we're meeting with clients, the staff that we have at our front reception are all masked, and it provides that sort of consistent messaging. And to some extent, mask wearing optically puts in the foreground how serious this is, and it really can be. And of course, always hand in glove with that consistent application is the consequence for not wearing. So if you're saying, you know, in my workplace, we require masks in these areas, and you see someone not wearing it, if you make a joke about that or ignore it, you're really contributing to the problem. That needs to be disciplined. That's a disciplinary action. And the best way to get compliance always is communication. Tell your staff, tell them again, put it on your website, tell it to visitors that are coming in that this is what's expected. Make masks available. Again, I make a plea for particularly the financially vulnerable in our communities. If you're requiring masks, and now the province is, make them available for people on your transit at the front of your city and town halls, so that they don't have that added burden of having to get a mask when they're so financially strapped. Final piece I wanted to talk about is just maybe a little bit more hopeful and in terms of going forward, and it is this. One of the earlier sessions we talked about how, and some of the other speakers were mentioning, this electronic manner of doing business is here to stay. And I think that's true, certainly to some extent anyways. I think we're going to always, it'll be maybe part of the silver lining from this terrible time in our collective history. But one of the areas that's up and coming, and I urge you to just consider it if you're looking at developing, and the day will come again when we'll all be developing again and building facilities and so forth. One of the fields of study that has really become excited in response to the pandemic is architecture. I was reading about a young man that was a UCLA graduate student in architecture, and his thesis was to incorporate elderly people into everyday life so that they're not ghettoized into retirement homes and nursing care. So his idea was, if you took one of those skyscraper units, and if some of the top units were elderly housing, and then the elevator could take them down to a main area where there would be dentist office and hospital or clinical services, and then down another layer and there would be retail, and down another there'd be mass transit. And this way, elderly and vulnerable people are still really engaged in community life, but they don't have mobility issues that you do trying to get out into the municipality where if you're living in a retirement home. So he no sooner had penned his thesis, of course, than the pandemic struck. So he won an award for his thesis, but he has now gone back and is saying that old-fashioned, frankly, architectural idea of a tall building that's multi-use with a core elevator where people are gathered tightly together is going to become archaic. So it's very exciting for architecture people, for students and for architects, because now they're doing what they went to school for. They're looking at problem solving. And one of the articles I was reading said, this is more than touchless elevators. This is really looking creatively at space and how we can do it so that going forward, people are safe because the space allows for that safety. There's another, I know we've got other speakers, so I'm going to wrap it up, but if you get a chance, there's a design, a new design that they're trying to put forward for airplanes, so that rather than sitting side by side, people are kind of sitting almost like bunk beds, and you have sort of a bubble to yourself, and the lower passenger has a bubble to his or herself. So it's kind of cool. So I just raised that for you because if you're looking at developing, if you're looking at building a structure in the future, it was something that was on the books for you, and maybe it got frozen due to COVID. When you go back to it, when you're looking at your design team and your architects, I'd put that question to them. Do you have anything novel that you can do in the event of these type of biomedical health emergencies that we might have? Have you embedded anything in your design, or can you, in terms of air circulation, in terms of actual use of space? And you might come up with some very cool and very creative ideas. I certainly hope so. So that's what I have to say for today. Again, great seeing everybody. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions that I'm able to answer, I will try and answer them.
Thanks a lot, Nuala. So now we're going to hand off to Jennifer Clay. and she's going to talk to us about some COVID-related employment issues. So over to you, Jen.
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Jen. I'm new. I'm a new face here, and I'm still trying to figure out this technology, so please forgive me if I'm looking in the wrong direction. So I'm here to talk to you today about your employer obligations, particularly as it relates to occupational health and safety. So as Tim mentioned, we're entering stage 3 in most municipalities. As municipalities, you are starting to open up more of your facilities. So you're going to have more members of the public interacting with your frontline staff. So we all know the Occupational Health and Safety Act requires employers protect their workers, take every reasonable precaution to protect their safety. So far with COVID, that's meant protecting against the physical risk. So things like providing PPE, all these mandatory mask rules we've been talking about, ensuring physical distancing is possible in your workplace. But occupational health and safety also applies to workplace harassment and violence. So why is that an issue now? Well, I'm sure we have all heard stories about members of the public going to a public place. Maybe they're at a grocery store and they disagree with how the cashier is doing their sanitizing procedures, or they go on public transit and they accost an employee about not wanting to wear a mask. So I'm sure we've heard stories, I'm sure we've witnessed it. Hopefully we have not participated. But as an employer, you have to remember that that's going to trigger your obligations to protect your employees from workplace harassment. So those obligations apply to members of the public dealing with your staff. So you have to prepare how to respond, making sure your employees know what procedures are available, what resources are available to help. For your frontline staff, that might mean training people on how to de-escalate situations, making sure everybody knows how to file a complaint if they have one, and even making sure they are reminded of how to summon immediate assistance if things escalate. Managers need to know what to do if they get a complaint, what to do if they witness something happening, or maybe they're in the lunchroom and they hear about a story that happened that day. So remembering that duty applies not only when you get a formal complaint, but when you as an employer reasonably should know that something's going on. Making sure you're documenting, making sure you're conducting an investigation reasonable in the circumstances, whatever those individual circumstances might be. Again, the duty to investigate is still going to apply when the respondent or the alleged harasser is a third party, is a member of the public that's coming in and threatening or harassing your staff members. Another thing to keep in mind is if your frontline staff does experience something like this, that's going to be very stressful. They might have some emotional responses that you as the employer should provide resources on how to deal with, whether that's referring them to an EAP service or some other resource that you have, or working with your joint occupational health and safety committee to provide them support. Another option, if you do think this is truly a risk that your frontline staff members will face, is being proactive about it. I'm sure you all have procedures in place for workplace violence risk assessments. So following those procedures, talking to your employees, what are they worried about, and what can you do to address those worries? So that's pretty much all I have to do to remind you of today. Just be mindful of your obligations as an employer to protect your workforce from the physical risk of COVID, we already know, but also the risk of workplace harassment. I flew through that, sorry. If I have, there are any questions, I still am figuring out how to use this technology, how to read the chat. But that's what I have to remind you of today.
So Jen, one thing that I did hear you talk about that has been a concern for me is that employers have an obligation to deal with harassment if they have knowledge of the harassment, not necessarily that they have a complaint. Can you tell us your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, so the same obligations are going to be triggered. I know of course, most employers are prepared when they get a formal written complaint of an investigation, but the same process has to apply when you reasonably should be aware of it. So if you see something happening, or you know that there's a risk that members of the public are going to come in and berate your staff, you still have to respond the same way you would as if there's a formal complaint.
And in that regard, I think it's appropriate preparation really for councils to ensure that there is maybe a refresher for harassment training, so that our staff know that their job does not require them to be subject to harassment and deal with inappropriate conduct from ratepayers. And I know that we have designed a number of policies to deal with this issue. We're updating our workplace harassment policy because of all of the experience that we've had with that. But we also have policies with respect to expected conduct in the workplace and communications. And so those are things that we could certainly help with if your municipalities are interested in those. Okay, Mia, I wonder if you could give us your helpful reminders.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I just want to say how happy I am that we are all together today. Last Friday was just not the same without a webinar and being together with our usual crew. So I'm happy to be here today. I'm just going to talk about the significant uptake that we've seen in going digital over the last few months within municipalities. So with COVID-19, we've had to address immediate and ongoing needs very quickly, and how these needs would be dealt with in the midst of a pandemic, and then what the future is going to look like. So from a technology perspective, we've seen a lot of challenges, but we've also seen a lot of benefits that have come out of this. We've seen the implementation of things that have been discussed over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, that have had to be implemented very quickly. The most obvious change that we have seen is the shift to working from home. This has been a huge change for most who have been used to working in office. So it's been a very big shift. Some municipalities were prepared more than others, and some have embraced this for a long time. It's been a rapid shift in IT, and a large amount of staff had to move quickly to working from home. Some love it, some don't love it so much, some are getting used to it, and then we're also hearing of people that just want to be back in the office. So there's a lot of different reactions to working from home, and also getting used to all the different technology that comes with that. I know myself, I had to jump right into using Zoom, and for a while it was an adjustment, but now I'm used to it and can log on like that and not experience any issues. We've seen quite an uptake in productivity as well. I think right now it's important that municipalities think of how they can continue to embrace this uptake in productivity, this uptake in technological innovation, and so on. We've seen huge companies like Facebook and Shopify and so on that had huge offices full of people that now are saying, we don't need those offices anymore because we've figured out how we can in fact do this all from home. A lot of us are even seeing in our personal lives how we've started to do a lot more electronically, from ordering everyday household items that we used to go to a store for. Now we're doing that online. I know myself, I would plan my trips to the grocery store. I would take my time down each aisle, and once COVID hit, we saw a lot of grocery stores now offering online grocery shopping and so on. I took advantage of that, and now that I'm used to that and I'm comfortable with using that technology, now that's all I do, and I don't know if I'm going to go back to the other way. But it's been a huge adjustment, and we're seeing that all across the board in different areas, different sectors within the municipality and so on, with respect to services that you offer. So our last webinar, not last week, but I spoke a bit about online parking. So you have zones within your municipality, and the signs are available, and you can log on to an app and pay for your parking using that app. So I know we have that here, and I know other municipalities have implemented that, but that's just something that we might see happen a lot quicker now in municipalities because of COVID and trying to avoid touching change and going to a parking machine or whatever it may be. So we'll see a lot of change in that as well. With municipal offices being closed for the last few months, we've seen a lot of services being switched to online, such as ordering tax certificates online, digital submission of drawings for building permits, booking appointments for certain things, and so on. So the question is, are we going to keep that online and continue with that, or as municipal offices start to open and we continue through this, are those services going to be moved back into the municipality? So it's all, our minds are moving as to what are we going to keep the way we have it now, or are we going to move it back? So this type of technology was implemented in days and maybe very short weeks, instead of the traditional months or years that it took to implement things like that. So there's lots of opportunity here for technology, and there's still a lot of room for growth. The importance of broadband connectivity is also reinforced during this time. We have to consider the digital divide that has occurred, or the lack of access to internet that we've seen as a really big problem. So it's really been magnified during this pandemic. At the beginning of June, Ford made an announcement that the government would be investing in more reliable broadband and cellular connectivity because during this pandemic, that disparity was magnified. So that's also something to think about too, moving forward with that. We've seen huge opportunities to digitize municipal processes, such as submitting timesheets, processing and paying invoices, again, dealing with permits, and so on. So this has all been very quick. Again, example, we talked about digital council meetings, but that's now a reality. That was just a thought in the past, but that's a reality now, and it became a very quick reality. A lot of leaders in municipalities are learning from this experience. They're learning from the innovation and the opportunities that technology offers. And, people are managing their staffs in a lot of different ways now using IT and so on. So of course, there have been a lot of headaches along the way, but there's also a big commitment that everybody has made to technology now during this, and everyone's coming together, and we have a lot of good leaders out there. So I think that's a very positive takeaway from this. And there are some things that hold organizations back from moving forward in technology, but it takes almost emergency situations like this to allow us to see exactly what we're capable of, and we're capable of doing a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. So also keep that in mind. I think the takeaway I want from everybody to get from this is be patient, be innovative, work together. Everyone's doing a great job under these circumstances, and moving forward with technology as we've seen now, it's not a bad thing, and it also offers a lot of good things to a municipality. So that's my takeaway for today for you. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks a lot, Mia. So we got a question, and I think that it's one that probably happens in a lot of municipalities, and it goes to Nuala's presentation. But the question is, look, if we have a policy in place with respect to wearing masks, we've done training on masks, the instruction has been given more than once, however, staff are still refusing to wear masks. What should we do about that? And so I would like Nuala to comment on that, but I think I'm also going to get Jen to comment on it as well. Okay, Jen, Mila's thinking about it. You
Sure.
go first.
The one issue that, I mean, it's probably not the answer you're looking for, but I would want to be mindful of your duty to accommodate. So maybe these employees have a legitimate reason to refuse. Maybe they have some sort of disability or a medical issue that's preventing them from wearing a mask, or I know people who are hearing impaired, they're an exception. So I would just be mindful of that before you jump to termination. Obviously, that's not going to be everybody's reason for refusing, but then, as you mentioned in the chat, following progressive discipline.
So a further question on that exact point, Jen, comes on the chat. How can we manage the personal reasons for not wearing masks, like emphysema, breathing problems, asthma? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say request medical documentation. Employees have to facilitate accommodation. They can't just demand any sort of accommodation they want. And you have the right as the employer to make sure it's a legitimate request.
I can't agree more with you, Jen. And I think that's one area that municipalities sometimes get themselves in trouble with, is by not asking for the medical documentation for an accommodation. Particularly now where we're in the throes of the COVID crisis. I would think that if somebody tells you that they can't wear a mask and you haven't documented why, it's going to lead to a couple of things. One is other staff not wanting to wear masks because Mr. Smith doesn't have to wear a mask. And also potential complaints from ratepayers to say, hey, you're not enforcing your policies evenly. So I agree with Jen 100%. Ask for and document medical reasons why you have to accommodate masks or anything else. When employees are being accommodated, like Jen said, they have an obligation to facilitate that process. Nuala, thoughts on people not following our safety policies?
Yeah, I think Jen raised some really important points about accommodation. I think it's something we have to look at what the approach has to be the same way it is with any sort of a disability. I notice you're not wearing your mask. Is there a reason for that? So you ask an open-ended sort of a question first. People are getting, in my experience, people are really getting that compliance fatigue, and they're just getting a little bit bratty. You know, I don't want to wear the mask to the bathroom. I don't want, it's just a little bit bratty. And if that's the case, then it is the hierarchy of discipline. One of the things that, a great thing about doing these webinars with a colleague right beside me is if I don't know the answer, he can tip me off. And that's what happened also. Tim said, we have to be concerned about the liability of the municipality also. Your obligation under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. You see, it's always competing legislation for municipalities. On the one hand, as Jen is referencing, you've got to be concerned about human rights, about disability, about accommodation. Occupational Health and Safety says you need to make sure that the workplace is safe for the people that are going to be working there. So you always have those sort of competing legislative requirements. So my recommendation would be I would ask the open-ended question about the mask. If it's just sort of a bratty response, because I don't want to, because I'm sick of it, I forgot it at home, something like that, then you can introduce a hierarchy of discipline. If it's legitimate disability-related reason, then work with the employee to try and accommodate them. Again, what we've been saying from the very beginning with compassion and creativity.
And one other thing, everyone, that and somebody who's maybe more familiar with the mask wearing order, at least here in Algoma, may be able to answer is, as far as I know, it's the penalty is on the organization, not the individual who's not wearing a mask. And so if you're permitting individuals into your workplace or stores, etc., if you're the store owner, that liability falls on the one who's going to get the fine is not the individual, but the municipality in this case, if they're not adhering to the order that the health units put out in those areas where there is an order like that. So so that was just something. I don't know if anybody in the team here has anything to comment on that. I haven't looked at that legislation, that order, probably as much as some of my colleagues, but I just thought that would be important to mention.
So for the rest of the team, Debbie Tonelli brings up one of the things in the health instruction, which is an order made under the Emergency Measures and Civil Protection Act, is that you don't require employees who have an exemption to provide proof of that exemption. I have a bit of problem with that, but that's what the order says. I think that even though you may not ask for proof of it, if you know that it's not true, then you may want to look at that from a disciplinary perspective. But before we go to any of that, I think one of the things to remember is that the people on this group, on this chat today, are all leaders. And we need to show compassion, as we've said, and we need to lead by example. And so I would certainly hope that we are wearing masks in the open, that we're following the policies, and that we're leading by example to show that we're in this together, and that we will get through it together. So those are my thoughts. I know that we're past out of time. I did want to put up the results for the poll because I think they're kind of interesting. And here are the results. So 83% of our municipalities are under a mandatory mask order, and I'm really happy that 100% of those are health unit orders. I'm happy to see that. Do you have PPE for employees, including masks? Most municipalities, 87% say yes. 13% say not yet. If you need help finding or sourcing issues, we can help with that. We have some resources that we can get you in touch with. And then the idea of what happens when people come to your office and they're not wearing masks. Both of these, I think, are right answers. We're refusing access because the public health order says that they have to be wearing a mask. And so I think you're definitely well within your right to refuse access. And I think, as Nuala's been saying, as we've been talking about masks all along, providing masks, particularly for folks who may not have the resources to acquire them, is certainly a good way to keep your municipality safe. Team, anything else? Any other comments? No? Okay. Well, we're a bit over time. I'm actually grateful for my team for helping us out through this. We have really been working very well together. Certainly happy that Jennifer has decided to join us. Hopefully she'll stay. And thanks to all of you for coming and joining us today. And with that, I'm going to sign off, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.